Kim Dae-ho had worked at the Lunar Relay Station for 6 years. He had seen thousands of transmissions pass through his screens. Colony reports, trade communications, personal messages from families spread across 12 star systems. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. The job was routine. Boring, even, but on this night something was wrong. The Kepler 442 colony had been silent for 3 days. At first, the commanders told everyone it was solar interference. The star in that system was known for its flares. Communications went down sometimes. It was normal. Dae-ho did not think it was normal. He worked through his shift, checking frequencies, adjusting receivers, trying to find any signal from the colony. 2.3 million people lived there, families, children, schools, and hospitals and farms. They could not just go silent. Then his screen lit up. A transmission was coming through. Strong signal. Clear frequency? Dae-ho felt relief wash over him. Finally, the colony was responding. He leaned forward to receive the message, but the signal was not from Kepler 442. It was about Kepler-442. The language was strange. Alien, nothing. In the translation database matched it, but the visual feed needed no translation. Dae-ho watched the screen and his blood turned cold. Human colonists were being herded like animals. Thousands of them, pushed into lines by tall creatures in dark armor. The aliens moved with cold efficiency, sorting people like objects. Young and healthy to one side, old and sick to another. Children were torn from their parents' arms. Dae-ho watched a mother scream as her daughter was dragged away. The sound cut through him like a knife. Then the executions began. The elderly were lined up against a wall. They were killed one by one, quick, efficient. The aliens did not seem angry or cruel. They were simply processing, removing what they did not need. Dae-ho's hands shook. He wanted to look away. He could not. The transmission included alien speech. Celebration? Pride? These creatures were broadcasting their conquest to their own worlds. They were showing off their new acquisition. 2.3 million humans reduced to resources. Labor stock. Biological material. Dae-ho recorded everything. His training took over even as his mind screamed. He flagged the transmission as highest priority. He sent it up the chain of command. Then he sat in his chair and stared at the wall. He had just witnessed the death of a colony. And he knew in his gut that everything was about to change. 3 hours later, Admiral Park Sojun stood in the command center of Federation Naval Headquarters. The lights were dim. The room was silent. 30 of her senior officers sat around her, watching the same transmission Dae-ho had received. Sojun's face showed nothing. Her hands rested on the table, perfectly still. She had commanded fleets in battle. She had sent soldiers to their deaths. She had made impossible decisions without flinching, but as she watched the children of Kepler 442 being sorted like cattle, something inside her went very quiet and very cold. The transmission ended. The screen went dark. No one spoke. Sojun stood slowly. She walked to the strategic display on the wall. Star maps, fleet positions, enemy territory marked in red. She began plotting coordinates. One of her officers spoke. Admiral, should we wait for orders from the Council? Sojun did not turn around. The Council will give the orders I need. Prepare the Third Fleet for departure. She was right. President Yoon Tae-young called an emergency session of the Federation Council within hours. Representatives from all 12 systems gathered in the Great Hall. The president stood before them, his face grave. "I'm going to show you something," he said. "It is difficult to watch, but you must see it. All of you." He played the transmission. For 12 minutes, the most powerful leaders in human civilization watched in silence. Some covered their mouths. Some gripped their chairs until their knuckles turned white. One representative, an elderly woman from the Mars colonies, began to cry silently. When the lights came back on, President Yoon spoke again. "The aliens call themselves the Veth Dominion. They have never contacted us before. They did not warn us. They did not declare war. They simply came to Kepler 442 and took our people." He paused. I am calling for a vote. Total war against the Veth Dominion. No negotiation. No diplomacy. We will find them, and we will make them pay for what they have done. The vote was unanimous. Not a single voice called for caution. Not a single representative asked for more information or time to consider. In that moment, humanity spoke with one voice, and that voice said, "War." The broadcast leaked to the public within days. Deho never learned how. Perhaps someone in the command chain decided that people deserved to know. Perhaps it was an accident. It did not matter, for what happened next. Billions of people watched the transmission. In Seoul, in New York, in Lagos, in Sao Paulo, in the orbital stations and the Mars domes and the mining colonies on distant moons, they watched the children being taken. They watched the elderly being killed. They watched the aliens celebrate, and something happened that the Veth could never have predicted. Humanity did not panic. There were no riots, no chaos, no screaming or crying in the streets. Instead, there was silence, a cold, heavy silence that spread across the planet like frost. People watched the broadcast, and then they stood up and went to work. But now they were working for a different purpose. Recruitment centers that normally processed a few hundred volunteers per day were suddenly flooded with millions. Lines stretched around city blocks. Old people, young people, teachers and doctors and engineers and farmers, all of them waiting patiently. All of them quiet. Factories that built cars and electronics and consumer goods began to retool. No one ordered them to. No government directive came down. The factory owners simply looked at each other and started making weapons, making armor, making ships. Scientists abandoned their research projects and reported to military development centers. Athletes left their training camps and enlisted for combat duty. Artists put down their brushes and picked up rifles. The entire human civilization turned, like a great machine, toward a single purpose. Deho watched the news reports in his quarters. He saw the lines at the recruitment centers. He saw the factories working through the night. He saw the faces of ordinary people transformed by something he could not name. It was not anger. Anger was hot and loud and burned itself out. This was something else. Something older. Something that humanity had buried deep inside itself for centuries, hoping it would never need to dig it up again. The Veth had sent their broadcast as a celebration, a demonstration of power. They had wanted to show their people what they had accomplished. Instead, they had woken something terrible. Admiral Park Soo-jin stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching Earth turn slowly below her. Transports were launching every hour, carrying soldiers and supplies to staging areas. The fleet was gathering. She thought about her daughter, 7 years old. She had been visiting her grandmother on Kepler 442 when the Veth came. Soo-jin had not cried. She had not screamed. She had simply taken her daughter's photograph and put it in her uniform pocket, close to her heart. Then she had gone back to work. The Veth thought they had conquered a colony. They thought they had acquired resources. They had no idea what they had actually done. They had made humanity remember what it was capable of. And now humanity was coming for them. 3 months passed since the broadcast. 3 months of preparation. 3 months of transformation. Humanity had become something new. Something frightening. Lieutenant Commander Baek Ji-woo stood in her shipyard on Mars, looking at the vessel taking shape before her. It was a destroyer, one of hundreds being built across human space. But this destroyer was different from any ship the Federation had ever made. She had removed the safety margins, the comfortable crew quarters, the redundant systems that kept soldiers alive if something went wrong. All of it stripped away. In their place, she had added weapons. More weapons. Engines that could push the ship faster than any vessel before it. Her design philosophy was simple. The ship did not need to bring its crew home. It only needed to kill the enemy first. Ji-woo had not slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. Neither had her team. They worked in shifts that never really ended, eating at their stations, dreaming about hull configurations and weapons arrays. Some of them had collapsed from exhaustion. They were carried to medical, given stimulants, and sent back to work. No one complained. No one asked for rest. Jiwoo thought about the children in the broadcast. She thought about them every time she felt tired. Then she went back to her designs. On Earth, Dr. Choi Minho walked through his laboratory and felt sick. He was a weapons researcher. Before the broadcast, he had worked on defensive systems, shields, countermeasures, ways to protect human ships and stations from attack. He had been proud of his work. He had saved lives. Now he was designing ways to end them. The Federation had given his division unlimited funding, unlimited resources, and no ethical oversight. The message from command was clear: build weapons that will win the war. Build weapons that will make the enemy fear us. Build whatever is necessary. Minho had built terrible things: gravitational implosion devices that could crush a space station into a ball the size of a fist, neural disruption fields that turned enemy soldiers' brains against them, biological agents designed to target Veth physiology specifically, turning their own bodies into prisons of pain. He tested these weapons on captured Veth prisoners. He watched them die. He recorded the results. He made improvements. At night, he went home to his empty apartment and sat in the dark. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself the Veth had started this. He told himself he was protecting humanity. He was not sure he believed any of it, but he went back to work the next morning. He always went back to work. Sergeant First Class Oyuna stood before her battalion and watched them train. They were not soldiers. Not really. 3 months ago, they had been teachers and farmers and office workers. They had never held weapons. They had never fought anyone. Now they moved through combat drills with a focus that made Yuna uncomfortable. There was no bravado in her battalion. No war cries or chest beating or talk of glory. Just quiet, methodical practice. Hour after hour. Day after day. Learning to kill with rifles and knives and bare hands. There was a grandmother in her unit. 63 years old? She had been a school teacher before the broadcast. Now she practiced knife combat until her hands bled. Yuna had told her to rest, to let her wounds heal. The grandmother had looked at her with calm eyes and said, "My granddaughter was on Kepler 442. I will rest when this is finished." Then she went back to practicing. Yuna had trained soldiers for 15 years. She had seen dedication before. She had seen courage and determination and sacrifice. She had never seen anything like this. This was not an army preparing for war. This was a species preparing for revenge. Director Shin Hyunjae led the Federation's intelligence division. His job was to understand the enemy, to find their weaknesses, to give human commanders the information they needed to win. What he learned about the Veth kept him awake at night. They had conquered over 40 species across the galaxy. 40 civilizations, some of them ancient and powerful. All of them defeated, enslaved, processed for labor and resources. None of them had ever successfully resisted. The Veth had no word in their language for defeat. The concept did not exist for them. They had never lost. They had never retreated. They had never faced an enemy that could match them. Hyunjae studied their military tactics, their technology, their culture. He learned that they saw other species as animals, resources to be harvested. They did not hate their victims. They did not feel anger or cruelty toward them. They simply used them the way humans might use cattle or lumber. The broadcast from Kepler 442 had not been an act of war. It had been an advertisement, a celebration of successful acquisition. The Veth had been showing off their new property to other Veth worlds. They had no idea what they had awakened. Hyunjae wrote his reports and sent them to command. He told them the Veth were powerful, experienced, undefeated. He told them this war would cost humanity dearly, but he also told them something else. The Veth had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never fought a species that would rather die than surrender. They had never encountered the kind of cold, patient fury that was now spreading across human space. The Veth did not know what was coming for them. Councilwoman Moon Yoonji stood alone in the great hall after another council session. She was tired. More tired than she had ever been in her life, she was the voice of caution, the one who urged patience, the one who asked if humanity really knew what it was getting into. She asked about the Veth's full military strength. She asked about the cost of total war. She asked if there was any possibility of negotiation, of finding a way to end this without millions more deaths. She was shouted down. Every time, the other council members looked at her like she was a traitor, like she had forgotten Kepler 442, like she did not care about the dead. She received death threats, hundreds of them. Her office was vandalized. Her name was cursed on the news networks. And worst of all, her own family members were enlisting for combat duty. Her brother, her nephew, her daughter. They looked at her with disappointment. They asked her why she did not support the war, why she was not standing with humanity. EUNG did not know how to explain. She supported justice for Kepler 442. She wanted the Veth to pay for what they had done. But she also saw where this was going. She saw humanity transforming itself into something terrible, something that might win the war but lose its soul. She wondered if she was the only sane person left, or maybe she was just a coward. She did not know anymore. The first expeditionary fleet gathered in Earth orbit. 4,000 ships. 2 million personnel. The largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Admiral Park Soo-jin stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the fleet. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers, all of them loaded with Jiwoo's new weapons and Minho's terrible devices, and soldiers, trained by people like Yuna, a machine built for one purpose: to find the Veth and make them suffer. Her officers waited for her orders. The fleet was ready. The coordinates were plotted. There was nothing left to do but go. Soo-jin thought about her daughter, 7 years old, brown eyes and a loud laugh, and a habit of asking questions that Soo-jin could not answer. She touched the photograph in her pocket. Then she opened a channel to the fleet. This is Admiral Park. We are about to enter enemy space. Some of us will not come back. Many of us will not come back. She paused. Her voice was calm, cold. They made a mistake. They showed us what they did to our people. They showed us our children's faces as they died. They let us see everything. Now we will show them what that costs. All ships, prepare for jump. The fleet entered faster than light transit. 4,000 ships vanished from Earth orbit in a flash of light, leaving empty space behind. On Earth, billions of people watched them go. They did not cheer. They did not wave flags or sing songs. They simply waited. The war had begun. The first expeditionary fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Reth 4 system. Alarms rang across every ship as sensors came online. The crews saw what was waiting for them: 6,000 Veth warships. A defensive fleet larger than anything humanity had ever faced. The enemy vessels were massive, their dark hulls covered with weapons that human engineers had never seen before. Admiral Park Soo-jin stood on her bridge and studied the enemy formation. Her fleet was outnumbered, outgunned. The Veth had better shields, better weapons, more experience. By every measure that mattered. The humans should not be here, but they were here anyway. Overlord Kethvan commanded the Veth Defense Force. He looked at the human fleet on his display and felt something close to amusement. This was unexpected. No conquered species had ever launched a counterattack before. Most of them surrendered after the first demonstration of Veth power. The others were crushed quickly. These humans were different. They had actually come to fight. Kethvan decided to give them a chance. It was more than they deserved, but he was curious about them. He opened the communication channel. Human vessels. I am Overlord Kethvan of the Veth Dominion. You have entered our territory without permission. This is an act of war. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. However, I am prepared to be merciful. Surrender your fleet and submit to processing. Some of you will be allowed to live or stock. Your genetic material will serve the Dominion for generations. This is more than your species deserves, but I am feeling generous. He waited for the response. He expected begging, negotiation, maybe some pathetic attempt at defiance before they realized how hopeless their situation was. Instead, the human fleet began to move. No response. No words, no demands or threats or pleas. The human ships simply shifted into attack formation and began accelerating toward the Veth line. Kethvan felt his amusement fade. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. All ships, he ordered. Destroy them. The Battle of Rethfor began. The Veth opened fire first. Their weapons were devastating. Human ships exploded in the opening seconds, their shields unable to withstand the assault. The void filled with debris and fire and the screams of dying crews, but the humans did not stop. They did not retreat. They flew straight into the barrage, taking losses that would have broken any other fleet. And they kept coming. The first human ships reached the Veth line and began to fight in ways the Veth had never seen. A destroyer lost its weapons in the first exchange. Its captain, a young woman named Anjasu, did not order a retreat. She ordered full speed ahead. Her ship slammed into a Veth cruiser at maximum velocity, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire that took out two more Veth ships nearby. A carrier found itself surrounded, its fighter bays destroyed. Its commander ordered the crew to abandon ship. Then he piloted the carrier himself into the center of a Veth formation and detonated its reactor. The explosion destroyed 6 enemy vessels. Ensign Kung Doha was 20 years old. He had been a university student before the broadcast. Now he piloted a corvette in the middle of the worst battle in human history. His ship took a direct hit early in the fight. Weapons gone. Engines failing. The corvette was dead in space, spinning slowly toward a Veth battlecruiser. Doha's crew told him to abandon ship. Get to the escape pods. There was still time. Doha looked at the battlecruiser ahead of him. He could see its bridge. He could see the Veth officers inside, directing the slaughter of his people. He told his crew to abandon ship. Then he stayed at the controls. He pushed the engines to maximum. The corvette groaned and shook as it accelerated toward the enemy vessel. His last transmission was quiet, calm, for Kepler. The corvette hit the battlecruiser's bridge at full speed. Both ships died together. The Veth had never seen anything like this. They had conquered 40 species. None of them had fought this way. None of them had been willing to trade their lives so freely for a chance to kill Da, and then the new weapons arrived. Dr. Choi. Minho's creations saw their first use at Rethfor gravitational implosion bombs that collapsed Veth stations into points of crushed metal. Neural disruption warheads that turned Veth crews' minds against them, leaving ships full of screaming, dying aliens. The biological weapons were worst of all. Canisters that broke open inside Veth vessels, releasing agents that attacked their specific physiology. The Veth died badly. They died in pain. They died knowing that the humans had designed this suffering specifically for them. Kethvan watched his fleet being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before. Something his species did not have a word for. Fear. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make the Veth lose. They spent 10 of their own ships to destroy 3 of his, and they considered that a victory. They flew into certain death without hesitation. They used weapons that were designed not just to kill but to terrify. This was not war. This was extermination. Kethvan made a decision that no Veth commander had ever made before. He ordered a retreat. His surviving ships turned and fled. They left Rethfor behind and ran for deeper Dominion space. KETH-VA and sent a report to the Dominion High Command. His words would shake Veth civilization to its core. These creatures do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not value their own survival. They will spend 10 of their lives to take 1 of ours and consider it a fair trade. Their weapons are designed not just to destroy us, but to make us suffer. I do not know how to defeat an enemy that has no fear of death. I advise extreme caution. We have awakened something terrible. The battle was over. Admiral Park Seo-jin stood on her bridge and looked at the aftermath. Debris fields stretched across the system. Thousands of human ships destroyed. Tens of thousands of her people dead. She had lost 40% of her fleet. By any normal measure, this was a disaster. A Pyrrhic victory that cost more than it gained. Any other commander would pull back, regroup, wait for reinforcements. Sujin opened a channel to her surviving ships. All vessels, begin salvage operations. Strip the Veth wrecks for useful technology. Repair what can be repaired. Resupply from cargo ships. She paused. We advance in 6 hours. There was no argument. No hesitation. The fleet moved to follow her orders. On one of the surviving cruisers, a young lieutenant named Cho Hejin helped carry wounded to the medical bay. He had lost friends in the battle. He had watched ships full of people he knew explode in seconds. He was exhausted. He was grieving. He was terrified of what came next, but he did not think about stopping. He did not think about retreat. He thought about Kepler 442. He thought about the broadcast. He thought about the children being torn from their parents. He went back to work. Across the fleet, the story was the same. Crews mourned their dead with quick ceremonies. There would be time for proper honors later. Right now, there was only the mission. The salvage teams found useful things in the Veth wrecks. Better shield generators, weapons components, medical supplies that could be adapted for human use. They took everything. The engineers worked through what should have been rest periods, repairing damage, patching hulls, bringing weapons back online. They worked until they collapsed, and then they got up and worked more. 6 hours later, the fleet was ready. Admiral Sujin stood on her bridge, looking at the star map. Reth 4 was behind them. Veth space stretched ahead, system after system, all the way to the enemy homeworld. It was a long way. It would cost many more lives. The Veth would not run forever. They would regroup. They would fight harder. None of that mattered. Sujin touched the photograph in her pocket. Her daughter. 7 years old. Gone forever. The Veth had started this. Humanity would finish it. All ships, she said. Prepare to jump. Next target, Reth 7. The fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. The war continued. 18 months of war. 18 months of blood and fire and death across Veth space. System after system fell to the human advance. Reth 7, Vithos 3, the Karn colonies. Names that meant nothing to humans before the war. Names that would be remembered forever after. Major Oyuna stood in the cargo bay of a transport ship, looking at the rows of body bags. 237 soldiers. Her soldiers. Dead in the assault on Vithos Prime's outer defenses. She took out her journal. The one where she wrote the names of everyone she had lost. She had filled 11 books already. This would start the 12th. She wrote each name carefully. Slowly, every person deserved that much. They deserved to be remembered as individuals, not as numbers. When she finished, her hand was cramping. She put the journal away and went back to work. There was always more work on Earth. Economist Wang Yumin sat in his office and studied the numbers. The numbers were bad. Worse than bad, catastrophic. Every industry on Earth was now focused on war production. Factories that once made clothes and furniture and electronics now made weapons and armor and ship components. Food production had shifted to military rations. Medical resources flowed to the front lines. The civilian economy was collapsing. Rationing was severe. People stood in lines for hours to receive basic supplies. Luxuries had vanished entirely. Life expectancy was dropping as hospitals ran short of staff and equipment. Worst of all, the birth rate had fallen off a cliff. People did not want to bring children into this world. Not while the war continued. Not while the future was so uncertain. Jae-min ran the projections over and over, hoping he was wrong. He was not wrong. At current rates, human population would begin to decline within 5 years. Within 20 years, there would not be enough people to maintain civilization. Humanity was winning the war. But it was destroying itself in the process. Jae-min sent his reports to the council. He did not know if anyone read them. Deep in Veth space, a scholar named Tithmore studied the enemy that was destroying his people. He had access to human prisoners, captured soldiers and pilots who were too wounded to fight back. He also had access to human cultural records, books, music, history, everything the Dominion had captured from Kepler 442 and other sources. What he learned disturbed him deeply. Humans were not new to violence. They had been killing each other since before they left their home planet. Their history was full of wars, genocides, weapons that could destroy entire cities, used against their own species. They had built atomic bombs and dropped them on themselves. Teth Moore studied the images of the destroyed cities. He read the accounts of the survivors. He learned that humans had done this not once but twice, killing hundreds of thousands of their own people in seconds, and then they had built even more powerful weapons. The Veth had always believed they were the supreme predators of the galaxy. They had conquered 40 species because they were stronger, smarter, more ruthless than anyone else. They were wrong. Humans were not more advanced than the Veth. Their technology was inferior. Their ships were weaker, but they had something the Veth did not have: a limitless capacity for violence against anyone who threatened them. The Veth had not created monsters by attacking Kepler 442. They had simply woken monsters that already existed. Monsters that humanity had spent centuries trying to bury. Teth Moore wrote his report to the High Command. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. We cannot win this war. The humans will not stop until we are extinct, or they are. There is no third option. Captain Beek Ji-woo, promoted after her ship designs proved so effective, commanded a destroyer squadron at the Battle of Vithos Prime, the Veth homeworld's outer defenses, the last major obstacle before the human fleet could reach the enemy. Her ships had been in continuous combat for months. Her crews were on their 4th deployment without leave. They were exhausted, traumatized, running on stimulants and willpower and hatred, but they were also utterly without mercy. The outer defense grid of Vithos Prime was massive. Hundreds of orbital platforms, thousands of weapon emplacements, all designed to stop any invasion. Veth strategists had calculated that any enemy would need at least 3 weeks to break through. Ji-woo's squadron did it in 9 hours. They used tactics that the Veth had never seen: suicide runs, ramming attacks, weapons that human engineers had designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. The defense grid crumbled piece by piece, and the Veth died in numbers that would have seemed impossible a year ago. When it was over, Ji-woo sat in her command chair and looked at the reports. Her squadron had lost 60% of its ships, thousands of her people dead, but the way to Vithos Prime was open. She ordered her surviving ships to regroup. They would rest for a few hours. Then they would join the main fleet for the final assault. She did not feel victory. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt empty, hollow, like something inside her had burned away, and would never come back. She wondered if that was the price of winning this war. Councilwoman Moon. Yoonji finally got her audience with the Federation Council. She had been asking for months, begging, demanding. Finally, they agreed to hear her. She stood before them and presented her demographic projections: population decline, economic collapse, the destruction of human civilization, not by the Veth but by humanity itself. We are winning every battle and losing the war, she said. At current casualty rates, we will suffer population collapse within a decade. Even if we destroy the Veth completely, we may not have enough people left to sustain our civilization. We will have won a war and lost our species. She paused. The council members looked at her with tired eyes. I am not saying we should surrender. I am not saying we should forget Kepler 442. I am saying we need to think about what comes after. We need to plan for the future. We need to make sure there is still a humanity left when this is over. The council listened politely. Then they voted to increase the conscription age to 60. Yoonji stood in the Great Hall after the vote, alone. She had done everything she could. She had warned them. She had shown them the numbers. And they had ignored her. She understood why. The broadcast was still in everyone's minds. The children being taken. The elderly being killed. The aliens celebrating. That memory was stronger than any statistic. The pain was deeper than any projection. Humanity would not stop. Could not stop. The war had become more than a military campaign. It had become a need, a hunger, something that could not be satisfied until the Veth were gone. Yunji left the Great Hall and went home. She did not know what else to do. On Vithos Prime, the Veth Dominion High Council convened in their capital. The most powerful leaders of the most powerful species in the galaxy gathered to discuss their future. For the first time in their recorded history, they discussed surrender. The word felt strange in their mouths. They had no experience with it, no framework for it. They had never surrendered. They had never needed to, but the humans were coming. And the humans were not going to stop. We must find a way to end this, one counselor said. We must offer terms, reparations, whatever they want. The survival of our species is at stake. Another counselor shook his head. You do not understand. There are no terms. The humans have not sent diplomats. They have not made demands. They have only sent fleets. They do not want our surrender. He paused. His voice was quiet, broken. They want our extinction. The council fell silent. They had no response to that. They had no strategy for an enemy that would not negotiate. An enemy that did not want anything except to see them dead. They were the greatest conquerors in the galaxy. They had dominated 40 species across 1,000 worlds, and now they were going to die. The human fleet gathered outside Vithos Prime. 4,000 ships, reduced to 2,000 by 18 months of war. But still they came. Still they prepared. Admiral Park Sojin looked at the enemy homeworld on her display. 4 billion Veth civilians. The heart of the Dominion. The end of the war. She touched the photograph in her pocket. Almost time. The human fleet hung in orbit. Above Vithos Prime. 2,000 warships, battered and scarred from 18 months of war. Below them, the Veth homeworld turned slowly. Blue oceans, green continents. Cities that glittered in the sunlight. 4 billion Veth civilians lived on that world. Admiral Park Sojin stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the planet. She had enough firepower to burn it clean. She could sterilize the surface in hours, turn those oceans to steam, turn those cities to ash, turn 4 billion Veth into nothing. Her orders from the Federation Council were clear. Total elimination of the Veth species. No exceptions. No survivors. Finish what they started. She thought about Kepler-442. She thought about the broadcast. The children screaming for parents who could not help them. The elderly executed because they had no value as labor. 2.3 million humans processed like animals. She thought about her daughter. 7 years old. Brown eyes and a loud laugh. Gone forever. The Veth had done that. They deserved what was coming. She reached for the command to begin the bombardment, and she stopped. Major Oyuna stood on the bridge of her transport ship, watching Vithos Prime through the viewport. She was ready for this to be over. She was so tired. She had buried too many people. She had filled too many journals with names. She wanted it to end. She thought about the grandmother from her first training battalion, the schoolteacher who had practiced knife combat until her hands bled. She had died on Reth 7, charging a Veth position after her rifle jammed. She had killed 3 of them before they brought her down. Yuna had written her name in her journal. She had written so many names. She was ready for the final assault. Ready to lead her soldiers onto that planet and finish the Veth forever. Ready for the killing to stop. She was not conflicted. She was not hesitant. She was just ... empty. Dr. Choi Minho sat in his laboratory on a support ship behind the main fleet. He had developed the final weapon, a biological agent that would spread through Vithos Prime's atmosphere and make the entire Veth species sterile within 1 generation. No violence. No bombardment. Just a quiet extinction. The Veth would live out their lives, but there would be no children. No future. Within a century, they would be gone. Clean, efficient, irreversible. Minho looked at the canister containing the agent. His life's work. The culmination of 18 months of designing ways to kill, he felt nothing. He waited for the order to deploy. Director Shin Hyun-jae entered Admiral Soo-jin's ready room with one final intelligence report. He had debated whether to bring it to her. He knew what the Council wanted. He knew what the fleet wanted. He knew what humanity wanted, but he also knew his duty. And his duty was to give the Admiral all the information, not just the information that was convenient. "Admiral," he said, "there's something you need to see." He showed her the intercepted Veth communications. Messages from the civilian population of Vethos Prime. Messages that told a different story than the one humanity had believed for 18 months, the 4 billion. Veth on the planet below had not known about Kepler 442, not until the human fleet arrived. The military and government had conducted the harvest without informing their own people. It was standard procedure. Civilians did not need to know the details of resource acquisition, but when the humans came, when the war began, the truth came out, and many Veth civilians had been horrified. There were protests on Vethos Prime. Veth citizens demanding accountability. For Kepler 442, demanding an end to the conquest and harvesting of other species. Demanding change, the Veth government was imprisoning them, silencing them. But still they spoke out. Hyun-jae showed the Admiral the messages. Veth civilians expressing shame for what their species had done. Veth parents trying to protect their children from a war they had not chosen. Veth individuals who were not monsters, who were just people trying to survive. Soo-jin looked at the reports for a long time. Then she stood and walked to the viewport. She looked at Vethos Prime. 4 billion lives. Guilty and innocent. Monsters and victims. All of them waiting for her decision. She touched the photograph in her pocket. Her daughter would never come back. Nothing would bring her back. Killing every Veth in the universe would not bring her back, but maybe that was not the point. Maybe. The point was what humanity became next. She opened a channel to VETHOS-Prime. The Veth High Council sat in stunned silence as the human Admiral's voice filled their chamber. They had expected bombardment. They had expected death. They had not expected words. "This is Admiral Park Seo-jin of the Terran Federation. I am speaking to the government and people of Vethos Prime." Her voice was cold, hard, but she was talking. "That was something. We came here to destroy you. We have the power to end your species in hours. Your military knows this. Your government knows this. Now you know this." She paused. 18 months ago, your Dominion murdered 2.3 million of our people. They were civilians, children, elderly. They were taken and processed like animals, and your leaders broadcast it as entertainment. We could do the same to you now. We could burn your world and feel justified. You have seen what we are capable of when we are wounded. You have seen that we will spend ourselves into oblivion to destroy those who hurt us. Another pause. Longer this time, but we are not going to do that. The Veth Council looked at each other. They did not understand. "We are going to give you one chance," the Admiral continued. "You will surrender your military forces unconditionally. You will turn over every individual responsible for Kepler 442 to face trial. You will pay reparations for 6 generations. You will dismantle your dominion and never again expand beyond your home system. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 1 hour to accept. If you refuse or if you ever harm another human being again, we will return. And we will not speak again." The channel closed. The Veth Council sat in silence for a long moment. Then they began to vote. It was unanimous. They had no choice. But it was more than that. They had seen what humanity could do. They had seen the suicide attacks and the terrible weapons and the endless advance that nothing could stop. They understood now what they had awakened. They would never forget. No one would ever forget. The surrender was signed. The war was over. Major Oyuna did not know how to feel. She was relieved. She was angry. She was not sure they had made the right choice. She was not sure there was a right choice, but it was over. She could stop writing names in her journal, at least for now. Dr. Choi Minho returned to Earth and destroyed his research. All of it, every weapon, every formula, every file. The things he had created were necessary, he told himself, but they could never be used again. He resigned from his position. He never spoke of his work. He tried to forget what he had become. Councilwoman Moon Yoonji was elected to lead the post-war reconstruction. She had been the conscience of humanity during its darkest hour. The one who had urged caution. The one who had asked about the cost. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a witness, but she did her job. She helped rebuild. She helped humanity find its way back to what it had been before the broadcast, or maybe to something new. Something that remembered Kepler 442, but also remembered Vithos Prime. Something that knew what it was capable of, but chose to be better. Admiral Park Soo-jin retired the day after the surrender. She gave no interviews. She wrote no memoirs. She returned to Earth, to a small house by the sea, and lived quietly. She had saved her species. She had defeated its enemy. She had also transformed humanity into something that terrified the galaxy. She did not know if those things could all be victories. She kept the photograph of her daughter in a frame by her bed. She looked at it every morning and every night. She never forgot. 10 years later, human and Veth diplomats met for the first time since the war. Trade was being discussed. Cultural exchange, normalization, a careful, slow rebuilding of trust between two species that had nearly destroyed each other. A young Veth diplomat approached an older human ambassador. The ambassador's name was Han Seo-jun. He had lost his wife and son at Kepler-442. The Veth diplomat asked a question that had been bothering his generation for years. Why did you stop? You could have destroyed us. You had the power. You had the justification. Why didn't you? Seo-jun thought about the question for a long time. He thought about his wife, his son, the broadcast that had changed everything, the war that had nearly consumed his species. Because we looked into the abyss, he finally said, and we saw ourselves looking back. We saw what we were becoming, and we decided that there had to be something left worth saving, even if we were not sure what it was. The Veth diplomat did not fully understand, but he was young. He would have time to learn. Humanity returned to its stars. They rebuilt. They remembered. They carried with them the knowledge of what they were capable of, the best and the worst. The mercy and the wrath they never forgot. Kepler 442, but they also never became the monsters that died there. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.